All right, everyone, welcome in. We're going to dive into a case today, and it's a tough one, honestly. It's the case of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif. You've probably heard about her. Found dead, sadly, back in August. Woking, England was where it all happened.
Yeah, a really tragic situation. We're going through court transcripts, news reports, everything we can get our hands on, really, to try and make sense of it.
And I think what makes this so difficult, aside from the obvious tragedy, is that there's just so much to unpack. I mean, you've got these three family members right at the center of it all. The father, Irfan Sharif, stepmother, Binash Batul, and the uncle, Faisal Malik.
Yeah.
And they're all saying they didn't do it.
And that's really the starting pistol for this whole legal process, right? When they say not guilty, it's on the prosecution to prove it. And that's a high bar to clear beyond a reasonable doubt.
No small feat. So what are the prosecution saying happened? What's their side of the story?
Their argument boils down to this. Sarah was abused, and that abuse led to her death. But actually proving that, it gets really complicated.
And then you've got the 999 call from Sarah's father, Irfan Sharif, from Pakistan, which is just chilling, to say the least.
That 999 call really threw a wrench into everything. He tells them pretty much that he beat her, then he leaves the country. It threw the entire investigation for a loop.
It's like something you'd see on TV, except it's real life, you know? Where do investigators even begin with something like that?
Well, the dad, Irfan Sharif, he immediately becomes the main person of interest, and they're trying to track him down. But it also makes you question the others, right? The stepmother, the uncle, what did they know?
Right, exactly. And that leads to this awful question. Was this a one-time thing, or had this poor girl been going through this for a while?
Well, that's what they're trying to figure out, the prosecution. They're trying to show what it was like in that house. And some of the strongest evidence, believe it or not, comes from the neighbors, the people who lived around them, you know?
They're often the ones who see those little details, the things that slip under the radar, aren't they? What sort of things were they able to tell the police?
Some pretty awful stuff, to be honest with you. One neighbor, they lived near the family before, told the police that there was a lot of noise coming from the house, banging, things being thrown around.
Okay.
And a child crying or screaming almost every time.
Awful, just awful. To think about a child trapped like that, did anyone ever try to step in?
That's what's so hard with these cases, isn't it? You wonder, could something have been done? And this neighbor, they said after these times, after all the noise, it would go silent, eerily quiet, you know?
Right.
She said, deathly quiet.
God, whatever happened just sucked the air out of the room. It's, were there others saying similar things, or was it just the one?
There was another one, yeah. This one was from their working neighborhood. And this neighbor remembers something super specific from 2 days before Sarah died. This really high-pitched scream. And they were certain, the neighbor, that it was someone in pain. It really stuck with them because it was so unusual, you know, for that street.
Yeah, and knowing what we know now, it sends chills down your spine. But those are all still kind of, they're pieces. But was there anything more concrete that the investigators found?
There was, yeah. And this is where it gets even worse. So, inside the house, they found traces of Sarah's blood on a cricket bat and a vacuum cleaner. They also found a belt buckle, a metal pole, and a rolling pin. Not exactly the kind of stuff you want to be thinking about in a family home, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, those could be used as weapons, right?
Yeah.
That must have been a big deal for the prosecution.
Huge. I mean, just having her blood there doesn't mean those things we're used to, Yeah. But it connects them, and it raises some really serious concerns about what she went through.
Right, for sure. And you mentioned earlier about the messages that investigators found. The digital trail, so to speak.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that? What did they find exactly?
This is where it takes a really, really dark turn. So remember Sarah's stepmother, Binash Batul? Well, she had been sending texts to her sister for years. And let me tell you, these messages are rough. They paint a very disturbing picture of what was happening in that house.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. What kind of things was she saying? Was she talking about the abuse?
She was. In one message from a few years back, 2021, she says, and I quote, "Irfan beat the crap out of Sarah. She's covered in bruises, literally beaten black. I feel really sorry for Sarah. Poor girl can't walk. I really want to report him."
Oh my God. Those words are just literally beaten black. It's difficult to even imagine. And she says she wants to report him.
She does, yeah. But then, a year later, she sends this really eerie message. She says, "Something happens to Sarah, I will not be able to forgive myself." It's like she had this feeling,
Like she knew. Like she was maybe not that it would go this far, but that something bad was going to happen.
Exactly. And those messages, if they're real, they could mean serious trouble for Betul. The prosecution could say that she was a part of it just by knowing.
Right? Like she was okay with it happening because she didn't do anything to stop it. So we've got potential witnesses and the neighbors, forensic evidence at the crime scene, and now these incredibly revealing text messages. Did investigation uncover anything else that might shed light on what happened to Sarah?
Yeah, there was one more thing from those messages that really got to me. So in the summer of 2022, she texts her sister again, and she's saying she can't hide Sarah's injuries anymore. She says, "He beat Sarah up yesterday, and I can't send her to school on Monday looking like that."
So it was that bad? The abuse, like everyone could see it.
Yeah. And what's even more heartbreaking is that it seems like Sarah knew she had to hide the injuries too. The prosecution says she started wearing a hijab to school in 2023, maybe to cover up bruises.
It's just, a kid trying to protect herself like
Yeah.
that. It's just awful.
It really is. And it makes you wonder how many people saw her and thought something wasn't right but didn't say anything. It's like, what if someone had spoken up? Could things have been different?
That's a question that follows this whole case, doesn't it? And something we're going to keep in mind as we go deeper. But before we get into that, let's talk strategy for a sec. Legally, I mean. If the prosecution has such a strong case, what options does the defense even have? It's hard to imagine, being in their shoes. What do you even say when there's so much evidence stacked against you?
Right. It's a tough spot to be in, no doubt. And remember, we talked about that beyond a reasonable doubt standard. Well, the defense, they're trying to chip away at that. They don't need to prove, complete innocence. Just introduce enough doubt to make the jury think twice.
So basically just make it so they can't be totally sure. Where do they even start with that, though? It seems like a steep hill to climb.
It is. From what we've seen, it looks like Irfan Sharif, he might say, okay, maybe some discipline happened, but I never meant to kill her. It's a long shot, but they might try to spin it as a horrible accident, Discipline that went way too far.
Tough to swallow, though, with those messages we talked about. The ones where she's describing the abuse. How can Binash Betul explain those away?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One thing they might try is saying she was a victim too, like she was scared of him, stuck in a bad situation, and couldn't help Sarah even though she wanted to.
So almost like she was helpless to do anything.
Yeah, kind of. But even then, the prosecution's gonna fight back. They'll probably say being scared doesn't mean you're off the hook, especially knowing about it for years.
Right. What about the uncle, Faisal Malik? He's a bit of a mystery, isn't he? What are they saying he did, and how could he possibly explain that away?
His role is fuzzy, for sure. The prosecution says he lived there, so he had to have known what was going on. But whether they can prove he actually did anything, that's a whole other story.
So maybe he'll say he didn't know, or that he was too scared to step in, something like that.
Exactly, like he was in over his head or worried about what would happen to him if he got involved.
It just leaves us with so many what-ifs and loose ends, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I can't imagine how frustrating that must be for everyone who knew Sarah and just wants some kind of closure.
It really is tragic all around, and that's the tough reality with cases like this. It's complicated, there are no easy answers, and even if someone's found guilty, it doesn't bring her back.
That's the part that really stays with you, isn't it? No matter what the trial decides, nothing can change what happened to Sarah. It's just a heartbreaking loss, and it makes you think, what can we do differently as people, as a community, to stop something like this from happening again?
That's the question, isn't it? And the answer is more than just thinking about it. It's about actually doing something. Paying attention, speaking up if something seems off, supporting those organizations that protect kids. It really is up to all of us.
That's right. Well, you've been listening to The Deep Dive. We may never have all the answers in Sarah Sharif's case, but one thing's for sure, we can't forget about her. We owe it to her, to all children, to learn from this and to be a voice for those who can't speak for themselves. If you see something, say something.